"I don't know how this ends," I whispered, "but I'm not walking away." His eyes closed, and for the first time since I found him, he pressed his head against my hand, not for approval, not for thanks, but for solidarity. It was the only moment of permission I ever got from him, and it was enough. The next day, I packed a small bag. Old medical records. A faded photo of my brother, the only one I had left. An envelope with $22 inside. I didn't know what I was planning, but I needed to be ready. The girl helped. Or maybe she just wanted to be near. She stood beside the chair as I folded shirts, stacking buttons on the armrest. 3 blue, 2 greens, 1 gold. She placed them in the bag when I wasn't looking, and I left them there. I found an old leash in the closet. Cracked leather, the metal ring rusted. I didn't know why I kept it. But when I held it up, the shepherd didn't flinch. He didn't come forward either. Just watched. As if to say, we don't run unless we have to. That night we didn't sleep. We stayed together in the front room. A quiet triangle of warmth and breath and silent promise. I didn't tell her what was coming, but somehow, I think she knew. Kids like her always do. Because when the morning came Friday, she dressed herself without help, buttoned the too big flannel shirt, tied it at the waist with a piece of twine, braided her hair, pulled the butterfly clip into place, not neatly, not perfectly, but deliberately. Like armor. The shepherd paced once, then sat at her side, and I stood at the window, watching the gravel road curve through the trees, waiting for the sound of tires. The house didn't feel like a hiding place anymore. It felt like a choice, and I was ready to make it. The car arrived just after 9. The sound of tires on gravel was quieter this time. Maybe because I was expecting it, or maybe because everything feels quieter once you've decided not to run. The girl was sitting by the window. She didn't flinch when she heard the engine. She just pressed one hand flat against the glass and left it there. The shepherd rose to his feet beside her. Not stiffly, not with the limp he sometimes carried. Today, he moved with purpose, like the rain-wet earth beneath him didn't matter. Like pain could be set aside. He stood in front of her. A wall of fur and breath and silent resolve. I stayed by the door. From here, I could see the edge of the driveway. 2 cars. One was the tan sedan from before. The other was dark blue, newer plane, with government plates. 2 people stepped out. Woman from before, coat zipped high against the cold. And a man broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, his jacket marked only by a small county seal. Neither carried weapons, but they carried authority, and that's something children like her can feel. Before it's spoken, the woman looked at the porch, at the windows, then she reached into her coat and pulled out a small folder. She didn't open it, she just held it like a question. I stepped out before she could knock. The shepherd moved with me, not at my heel, but beside me. The girl stayed behind. In the doorway, framed by shadow. Her hand is still on the glass. "I appreciate you coming," I said. The man nodded, cautious. We were hoping for a quiet conversation. His voice wasn't hard. It was almost gentle, but I knew what it carried. I nodded once, keeping my voice low. "She's been here 8 days. The woman took a half step forward. "And you are?" I hesitated. I didn't want to give my name. Not because I was hiding, but because once you name yourself in these conversations, you stop being a person, you become a case. But I gave it anyway, first and last. She wrote it down without comment. The man looked past me toward the house. "She's in there?" "She is." "May we see her?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped aside and gestured toward the door. The girl hadn't moved. Not 1 inch. She stood in the frame, bare feet just inside the threshold, the frayed flannel still tied at her waist, the butterfly clip catching, a glint of light in her hair, and her eyes didn't blink. They just watched. The woman froze. Not in fear. In recognition. Something passed across her face briefly, but real. The look of someone who had seen lost children before, but not like this. Not a child who stood without flinching. Without hiding. Just standing. I understand this must have been confusing for her, the woman said, softly. We appreciate that you've looked after her, truly. I didn't answer, because this wasn't about appreciation. This was about a decision. The man stepped forward now, hands loose at his sides. Do you know her name? No. Did she tell you anything? No. Did she speak? I hesitated. She hasn't spoken, but she listens. She understands more than we do. The man nodded slowly, his eyes still on the girl. We ran her prints. My heart clenched. I hadn't expected that. But of course they did. They have to. She was processed through a shelter once. 6 months ago. A fire. House abandoned. No guardians ever came forward. There was mention of a dog, but no one believed it. Her case was closed. They assumed she wandered off, or he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. She has no file now. The woman added, no placement, no claim. She doesn't exist on paper. I looked at the girl again. She hadn't looked away, then. What do you want to do? I asked. The man looked at the shepherd. And then to my surprise, he crouched. He didn't reach. Didn't speak to the dog. Just knelt on one knee and waited. The shepherd didn't move, but his body eased. Slightly. Like he had decided not to fight. Not because he trusted, but because he could tell. This was not a man who would drag someone out screaming. The girl stepped forward then. Just one step. Onto the porch. The shepherd followed. One step behind. Her bare feet met the wood with no sound. The air moved slightly around her, like the house was exhaling. She walked toward the man, stopped a foot away, tilted her head, and then finally she spoke. One word, not loud, not trembling, just quiet, like she had practiced it for days, like she had waited to use it only when she was sure it would matter. Stay. The man froze. The word floated between them like a held breath, and in that stillness, something shifted. He looked up at me. I looked down at her. And then, as if the question had already been answered, the shepherd sat, not in front of her, not beside her. Behind her. As if he no longer needed to block the door. The woman stepped forward. Her voice was barely audible. We're not here to take her. We're here to see what she needs. I nodded once. She needs him. And you? I looked past them, to the road, to the trees, to the place where the house faded into silence. And then back to her. I'm just the one who stayed long enough for her to say it. They didn't speak again for a while. And then the man stood. He pulled a small notepad from his coat and wrote something down. A name. A number. No agency. No logo. He handed it to me. If anyone comes looking, you call this. No one else. The woman looked at the girl. Do you want to come with us? She asked. A pause. Then. The girl stepped backward, back into the doorway. Into the house. She didn't speak again. She didn't have to. The shepherd turned. Followed. And the door stayed open, just a crack. They didn't close it. Neither did I. Because sometimes a door left slightly open is the loudest answer of all. They didn't come back the next day. Or the day after, but they had left something behind, and it wasn't just the notepad with the number. It was the air. Changed. Less like hiding. More like waiting. The girl felt it too. I could see it in the way she moved. Not anxious, not afraid, but aware. Aware that the quiet we'd built together might not stretch forever. She began to check the windows again. Often. Just once in the morning, once before sleep. She'd press her forehead to the cool glass and scan the line of the trees, then pull back like she was watching for someone whose face she wasn't ready to see. And yet something in her had softened. That night, for the first time, she crawled into the armchair where I sat. No sound. Just climbed up with the same wordless precision she did everything else. She tucked her legs underneath her, laid her head against my ribs. Didn't move. The shepherd watched from the foot of the mattress, his ears twitching with every breath. We took, but he didn't follow. He didn't need to. He was watching the door again. He always did when she rested against someone new. It felt like a test, not of loyalty, but of continuity. As if you were asking, will you stay here after she sleeps? Will you hold the silence without letting it break her? I didn't move, didn't shift. I stayed until her breath slowed, until her arm slipped from my side and hung loose at her lap, until the deep rhythm of her sleep folded into mine. When she woke in the morning, she was still there, and the moment she opened her eyes, still half dreaming, she reached out. Not for me, for the space beside her. The space where he had been, and he was there already. He moved into it before she even reached. Like he had timed it, like he'd memorized her rhythm. That's how I knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about belonging. She belonged to him, and he somehow impossibly belonged to her. And me? I was the one with the choice now. That day I called the number, the one they left on the notepad. Not to report, not to ask, just to say something I hadn't yet said aloud. She wants to stay. There was a pause on the other end, not cold, just measured. Then a breath. And the voice, it wasn't the man from before, but someone new, said, "That makes things harder." I nodded, even though they couldn't see. I know, but not impossible. That surprised me. Is that official? No, it's human. A pause. Can you keep her safe? Without claiming her? Yes. Can you keep the dog too? He's the reason she's alive. Another pause. Then keep doing what you're doing. But understand something. I know, I said, before they could finish. Nothing is permanent. Another silence. Then, quietly, sometimes that's exactly what makes it sacred. They hung up, and I sat there for a long time, holding the phone, holding the stillness, holding the weight of what I'd just been given. Not permission, not protection, just possibility. A few days later, the girl began speaking again. Not stories, not full thoughts, just words. Up. More. Here. Him. Always him. When I brought water, she pointed to the bowl first. When I handed her bread, she broke off a piece for the shepherd before she touched her own. She shared before she asked. And I realized no one had taught her that. It was who she was. One evening, I found her in the hallway. She was crouched near the baseboard, arranging a row of small pebbles she had collected in the yard. She looked up at me, her hair wild, her hands smudged with dirt, and whispered, "His paw was bleeding before." I knelt down. Slow. She placed a small gray stone beside a white one. I wiped it with my shirt. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't telling a secret. She was offering a memory. And what happened after that? I asked. She placed a final stone, black, chipped at the end of the row. He followed me through the smoke. And that was all. No explanation. No timeline. Just the truth. She had saved him. And he had followed, maybe through a burning house, maybe through days of ash and fear and distance. And now they had found me. She looked at me again, eyes serious. "No fire now." "No," I said. "No fire now." She nodded once. Then crawled into my lap without another word. That night, the shepherd lay at the threshold again, but not facing the door this time. Facing inwardly. As if the danger wasn't outside anymore. It was forgetting how to stay. The next morning, I opened the back door and stepped out into the gray chill. The girl followed, barefoot as always. The shepherd came last. We stood in the yard with the three of us and said nothing. No wind, no rain, just breath and silence and the thin winter sun trying to break through the trees. She wandered to the fence and stared at the field beyond it, then pointed to the far end, where the tall grass met a rusted swing set I hadn't noticed before. "Mine," she said softly. I didn't know if she meant the swing, the field, the moment, but I nodded. "Yours." She turned. to the shepherd, who had already padded toward the swings. She ran to him for the first time. Ran, and he met her halfway. They stopped in the middle of the clearing, side by side. She didn't look back at me, and she didn't need to. She had already chosen where to stand, and so had I. Winter sets in slowly. The leaves were already gone, but the wind began to move differently, not sharp, but patient, like it knew it had time, like it had been here before and didn't need to rush. The girl adjusted first. She always did. She took to dragging blankets across the house, making nests in unexpected corners, sometimes near the heater, sometimes beneath the kitchen table, once even at the foot of the bed where the shepherd liked to sleep when the wind moaned hard enough to sound like voices. She didn't say much anymore. Not because she had regressed, because she didn't need to. Words had their place. But presence has become its own language between us. She'd started humming again. Quiet little patterns, the kind children make when they feel safe but still remember being afraid. She'd hum while she traced circles on the fogged-up windows, while she waited for soup to boil, while the shepherd lay beside her, breathing. Slowly, eyes half closed, she'd hum and he'd breathe, and I'd watch, not to protect, but to witness. That was my place now. A month had passed since the last car. 3 weeks since the last name was spoken. 4 days since the girl had climbed onto the mattress without the ritual of tapping it 3 times her old bedtime right. It had simply faded. Like grief sometimes does. One morning, I woke to find her already dressed. The flannel shirt still, hers buttoned crookily, tied with a new ribbon we'd found in a box of sewing scraps. Her hair pulled back in something resembling a braid. She was feeding the shepherd. She wasn't using her hands. She'd portioned his food into an old bowl, placed it beside the heater, and waited. He didn't eat until she gave a soft nod. Barely perceptible, but clear. That was the first moment I realized something had changed. They were no longer just protecting each other. They were watching over me too. That day I found her standing in the hall with a slip of paper in her hand. I hadn't seen her write anything before. I didn't know she even could, but there it was. A name. In large, careful letters, uneven, blocky, written in pencil. Below it, a second line, a name for the shepherd. I read them once, then folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. I never asked if those were their names before. It didn't matter. What matters isn't what name someone was given. What matters is what name they choose to answer when they're finally safe enough to hear it. Spoken. We carved a routine from the slow days. I taught her how to boil water. She taught me how to find the perfectly round rocks in the yard. The shepherd lay at the door each morning, waiting to see if I would step out. I always did, sometimes just to stretch, sometimes to bring in the cold and remind us we were still here, still real. One evening, the girl brought me a drawing. 3 figures, one tall, one small, one 4-legged. All standing beneath something that looked like a tree but could have been a roof too. Her lines were uneven, but her meaning was exact. She didn't hand it to me. She tucked it into my jacket when I wasn't looking. That night, the fire in the heater burned longer than usual. And none of us said a word. It was just before dawn when the final moment came. Was up early, stirring coffee in the half-dark. She slept on the mattress, curled into the shepherd. One hand twisted into the long fur at his shoulder. The wind had gone still, the kind of still that makes a house feel like it's holding its breath. I didn't want to break it. So I sat in the corner, coffee going cold in my hand, watching the shape of them, the girl and the dog, tangled together like they'd been born from the same memory. And in that quiet, the truth came, not loud, not suddenly. Just steady. They had found what they needed. Not in me, not even in this house, but to each other, and maybe, in this one small chapter, I'd given them something they could carry. That was enough. I rose, set the mug down and moved toward them slowly, careful not to wake. I knelt beside the mattress, brushed a strand of hair from the girl's brow. Her breath stirred. But she didn't wake up. And the shepherd, still as stone, opened one eye. He didn't move, but his gaze met mine, and I swear, at that moment, he understood. Not in the way animals understand command or habit. In the way family does. The kind of understanding that doesn't need language, that says, I know. I see you. I trust you. I laid my hand on his side. Felt the warmth of him, the slow rhythm of his lungs, and I whispered the only word I hadn't said out loud since the day I found them home. Just that, a single breath, a release. The sun crept over the edge of the trees, lighting the frost on the windows. The kind of golden gray that only happens at the end of long winters. She stirred a little, rolled closer into his chest, and the shepherd let out a sigh, deep, full, content. I stood, pulled the blanket higher over her shoulder. The house was warm. The day was quiet. And for once, no one was listening for footsteps. Outside, a single paw print had frozen into the porch, frost perfect. Delicate. It would fade by noon. But I left it there anyway. Some things don't need to be kept to be remembered. Slowly, and pressed my palm to hers on the opposite side of the glass. And through that pain of cold, we touched. Not skin, but something older. Recognition, reflection. And a choice. She turned, walked back to the mattress. The shepherd followed. And I stayed there a moment longer with my hands still against the window, listening to the world outside whisper, not yet. But soon. The knock didn't come again the next day, or the one after, but something had shifted. The silence wasn't the same anymore. It still wrapped the house, still filled the rooms with soft breath and ticking heat, but now it felt watched. Like silence waiting to be broken. The girl sensed it too. She stayed closer, not fearful, just alert. She'd begun sleeping with her eyes half open, not wide, not restless, just cracked, as if part of her refused to fully let go. The shepherd noticed. He didn't lie down as deeply anymore. Didn't rest with his back turned to the door. He faced it now. Every night, every time. There was no bark in him. Still none. But there was posture. And posture speaks volumes. I had lived in that posture once. In the long stretch of grief that followed a loss I wasn't brave enough to name out loud. Not then. Not even now. It had shaped my shoulders the same way. Bent my spine. Made me listen to sounds that hadn't happened yet. And so when I looked at them, the girl and the dog, I didn't see any strangers. I saw mirrors. That morning I made eggs. A small thing. But it felt monumental. The girl sat at the table, if you could call it that. It was a folding card table I'd found in the shed out back. Legs rusted slightly. One corner bowed inward like it had carried too much weight once and hadn't recovered. She ate with her fingers. Dainty, careful, like she didn't want to take more than she needed. I gave her the last bite. She tried to hand it back. No, I said, shaking my head gently. It's yours. She stared at the egg, then down at the plate. And then the smallest thing. She nodded once. A tiny sign of trust. A choice to believe I meant it. The shepherd rested nearby, eyes half closed, but his ears twitched every time I stood. And then, in the afternoon, the sound returned. Not the knock. A car. Slow. Gravel crunching under tired wheels. I moved to the window. An old tan sedan pulled into the drive. Parked, engine humming, then quiet. The girl looked up. The shepherd rose. He didn't move toward the door. Not this time. He moved toward her, stood directly in front of her. Shoulder to shoulder, facing out. The car door opened. A woman stepped out, mid-40s maybe, wearing a jacket too thin for the weather and carrying a clipboard tucked under one arm. No badge. No uniform, but the kind of face trained to be gentle. She stood at the edge of the porch and called out, not loud, not forceful. Hello? I opened the door just enough to see her clearly. Her smile was small, measured, professional. Sorry to drop in. I'm with a family assistance unit in the county. We had a neighbor call about a child. I didn't respond. She went on, softening her tone. They said she might have been seen walking with a dog near the old shops on Mercer. And someone mentioned she may be staying here. We're not here to cause trouble. Just trying to check safety. That's all. Her eyes weren't unkind, but they weren't neutral either. They were curious, the kind of curiosity that leads to forms, calls, processes. I nodded slightly. She's safe. I said. The woman nodded like we were agreeing on something unspoken. I believe you. But you understand, we still have to see her. Just a wellness check. I didn't open the door any wider. She's sleeping. It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. She had been. 20 minutes ago. The woman exhaled one of those practiced sighs that sounded like sympathy but carried weight behind it. We don't have a record of her missing. That's part of why we're confused. There's no open alert. No name. No one's filed a report. I stayed silent. She looked down at her clipboard, flipped a page, tucked it back. Would it be all right if we followed up tomorrow? I could bring someone with me. Maybe someone trained in nonverbal communication. If she's not speaking, that's all right. But we'd just like to understand her circumstances. Her voice was still kind. But there it was, the shadow. Circumstances. That word. It hangs in the air like smoke. Circumstances mean paperwork, custody, placement. The shepherd hadn't moved. He stood inside the house, unmoving, his body pressed against the girl's side. I imagined what she'd do if the woman stepped through the door. I imagined the soft crack of her rhythm breaking the bedtime taps, the clockwise turns, the careful way she reached for eggs like asking for too much might undo the whole thing. I'll think about it, I said. The woman offered a card. I didn't take it. She laid it gently on the porch railing. Her voice was low now, lower than before. You seem like a good man. Then softer. But we both know how these things work. She turned and walked back to the car. Didn't rush. Didn't threaten. But her tires left marks in the gravel. And the cold wind followed her out. I closed the door, locked it, turned back. The girl hadn't moved. But her face had changed. She wasn't afraid. Not exactly. But she was listening differently now, not to me, to the house. To space. She was recalibrating. Walked toward her, sat on the floor, leaned back against the wall. After a long moment, she crossed the room, quiet, soft, and sat beside me. Not in my lap. Not touching. Just near. And for the first time, she reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were cold, thin, still damp with the shape of a life. I didn't yet know, but she held it like a decision, and I didn't speak. Because now I knew what she needed. No explanation, not promises, just someone to stay. The card stayed on the porch for 2 full days. It sat there beneath the rusted railing, edges curling slightly as the weather turned. Again rain, then mist, then a heavy kind of air that pressed everything into stillness. I didn't touch it, but I looked at it. Every time I opened the door to let the shepherd out, every time I stepped onto the porch with a mug of something hot in hand, every time the girl hovered in the doorway behind me, silent, watchful, waiting, I saw it, and I didn't bring it in. Not because I was stubborn, but because I was afraid. Paper invites consequence. It doesn't matter how kind the face is that delivers it once you bring it over the threshold. Once it crosses the line from out there to in here, it becomes real. And we were still surviving on what wasn't real. The girl hadn't spoken, not a word. But she'd started humming soft, tuneless sounds while she laid buttons on the windowsill in symmetrical rows. Each morning, she rearranged them. Color, size, shine, a ritual like everything else. And always, the shepherd stayed nearby, never quite touching her, just close enough to catch her weight if she fell. Sometimes I caught her watching me, not the way kids watch adults, waiting to be entertained or answered, But the way survivors watch open doors, calculating, measuring, will you leave? Will you lie? Will you disappear like the last one? I didn't answer her aloud, but I stayed. That was my answer. On the third day, I walked out onto the road. The gravel felt louder underfoot than it should have. Every crunch is a warning bell, but I needed distance. There's a stretch just past the bend, where the trees open wide enough to see the valley. It's quiet out there with nothing but brittle fences and fog-wrapped fields. I stood there for a while. Let the air fill my chest. I thought about choices, about what it means to step into someone else's storm, not as a rescuer, but as someone willing to get wet with them. The shepherd followed me halfway, then stopped. He looked back toward the house. Toward her, he didn't bark, didn't whine, but he stood there firm, as if to say, one of us always has to stay with her. I nodded and turned back. By the time I reached the porch again, the card was gone. I froze. Looked around. No car, no footprints, no signs. Just the empty railing. And on the doormat, a folded piece of paper. Inside it, a typed note, brief, following up Friday. With officer support. We hope to speak with the child directly. Please be present. Thank you for your cooperation. No threats. No warrants. But the meaning was clear. Time was closing in. I read it once. Then again. Then I burned it in the kitchen sink, quietly, slowly, not out of panic but mourning. I sat on the floor that night, back against the wall near the heater, knees drawn up. The girl was already asleep. Her body curled into the shepherd's side, her hand loosely knotted in the fur behind his ear. She'd stopped tapping the mattress 3 nights ago, stopped turning in circles, before lying down, and I didn't know if that meant she felt safe or if she was preparing to let go. The house creaked in the wind. The kind of creak that feels like breathing long, slow, half asleep. And in that sound, I heard everything I hadn't said. I didn't know her name. I didn't know what had burned behind her, what had sent them running, who had tried to find her, or worse, who had tried not to, but I knew what she had now. She had him, and he was not something you could replace. The shepherd lifted his head. Look at me. And I saw the question in his eyes. Will you keep her safe? Not just today, not just until the knock, but afterward. And I didn't have an answer. So I gave him honesty. I crawled forward, slowly, and rested my hand beside her on the mattress. Felt her warmth, felt his breath. That's when I noticed the scar. Near his ribs, beneath the dried clumps of fur, a long, white line. Old, jagged. It had healed badly. This wasn't his first injury. It wasn't even his first fire. Maybe. He had the body of a survivor, not just of trauma, but of time. The kind of dog people forgot about until they needed him. When I finished, I sat back and let the towel fall into my lap. The baby had fallen asleep again, her fingers still curled into his coat. I studied her face. There was something familiar there. Not in the way you recognize a person, but in the way you recognize a feeling. She reminded me of a photograph I hadn't seen in years. The kind that doesn't survive moves or floods, but lives in the mind anyway. Corners curled, faces blurred, but still true. I tried to picture how they'd come together, tried to trace it backward. A fire. That much I knew. Smoke in the shepherd's coat, ash in the girl's hair, scrapes on her legs, the burned edge of his collar. But who lit it? Where had they come from? How far had they walked? And why had they ended up outside a toy store, wrapped in each other like 2 ghosts waiting for the world to notice? I didn't know yet, but I would, because grief recognizes itself, and whatever had broken them, it echoed the same ache that lived in my own ribs. We were mirrors, the 3 of us. Not family. Not yet, but something like it, something heavier, more sacred. The heater clicked again. The wind pressed against the side of the house, rattling a loose shutter somewhere. I stood, turned out the light, and sat back down on the floor close enough to feel their warmth. Far enough not to disturb it. Sleep came slow. But when it came, it wasn't the restless kind. It was quiet, like the breath before forgiveness. Morning came softly. No sun, just a gradual lifting of the dark. The kind of light that fills a room without asking permission. I woke up on the floor. My back is stiff. My cheek pressed to the sleeve of my coat, damp with breath I didn't remember breathing. Heater ticked quietly. The house was still. And for a moment, I didn't move, afraid that any shift might tear through whatever delicate thread had held the night together. The girl was still on the mattress, but her hand was no longer curled into the shepherd's coat. It hovered, suspended in sleep, reaching. And then, without sound, her eyelids fluttered. Not wide, not startled, just enough to let in the faint gray of morning. She didn't look at me, didn't move her head. Her hand simply dropped lightly onto the shepherd's side. A touch so familiar, so practiced, that it felt older than she was. And he responded. Not with movement, but with breath, a slow, deep exhale. His chest rose, then settled as if he'd been waiting for her to find him again. I didn't speak. They didn't need my voice. At that moment, I wasn't the center of anything. I was simply present, a quiet observer in the small orbit of their bond. She sat up slowly, her legs drawn beneath her like she'd done it 100 times on floors. Just like this. Her hair was still tangled. A few strands stuck to her cheek with dried salt. Her cheeks were pale, lips dry, but her eyes were alert, watching. Not with fear, but with that uncanny, quiet intensity that only very small children seem to carry. She looked at the shepherd again, pressed her forehead to his side. Then sat back. I moved slowly toward her, not out of caution, but respect. I held out a water bottle, unscrewed, tilted slightly in case she chose to reach. She didn't blink. But after a long pause, she reached with both hands, held the bottle close to her chest, drank in small measured sips, then handed it back without a word. There was no need to praise her, no need to coax or comfort. She was functioning on instinct now, the kind carved into bone when a child has had to survive something alone. Except, she hadn't been alone. She'd had him, and I was beginning to see how much that mattered. Glanced toward the bandage I'd wrapped the night before. Still tight, still clean, but his limp was worse this morning. I needed to get him seen. Soon. But first, food. There was a small stack of supplies in the kitchen, mostly left over from visits months ago. I kept them there in case I couldn't make it back to my real apartment, in case I had to disappear for a few nights. Unnoticed. Old habits die slow. I brought out what I had: a sleeve of crackers, a soft apple, and a dented can of beef stew I'd once planned to eat but never opened. The girl took the crackers without hesitation. She didn't devour them, didn't eat like someone starved, just steady, quiet bites. She chewed like she was used to rationing. The shepherd, on the other hand, hesitated. He looked at the food in the bowl, stew warmed slightly from the stoves, pilot heat, and then at the girl. Only when she nodded, barely perceptible, did he eat. It wasn't obedience. It was permission. She allowed him to rest, allowed him to eat, as though their roles had flipped at some point along the road. She was a protector now, or thought she was, and maybe, in her own way, she was. She leaned against his shoulder again, still chewing her final cracker, and closed her eyes. Not to sleep, just to be. And I wondered, not for the first time, who she had been before all this. What she had seen, what she had carried. There was no paperwork in her pockets, no backpack, no scrawled note pinned to her dress, just her. Her and the butterfly clip still tangled in her hair, faded pink, slightly cracked. The kind of thing someone would buy without thinking. A dollar bin item, bright enough to distract a toddler in a grocery line. But now in this place, it was an anchor, a symbol of someone who had tried, however briefly, to give her joy, or normalcy, or both. I sat near the wall, pulled my knees to my chest. The heater clicked again. Outside, wind pressed against the house, shaking loose the last few brown leaves from the skeletal trees. The girl reached out and began smoothing the shepherd's fur with the flat of her palm. Not brushing, not even petting, just pressing down, reassuring him with touch. I realized then she was checking for wounds, the same way I had. The same way someone must have shown her once. A nurse, maybe. A parent. Someone who'd taught her how to care before everything burned. She moved around his neck, around the bandage on his leg, and then paused at his side. A spot I hadn't touched, and her face changed, not in panic. But I'm concerned, her brow furrowed. She leaned close, gently pushing his fur aside. I crawled forward and met her gaze. Then I looked. There just beneath the ribs, half hidden in the coat, a deep bruise, purple, angled. Not from running. Blunt force. My breath caught. He'd been struck. Hard. Her hand hovered above it, not touching now, just trembling there. I covered her hand with mine. She didn't look at me. But she let it stay. The shepherd exhaled again, eyes half-lidded. No protest. Only acceptance. I stood and moved back into the kitchen. Rummaged until I found the old first aid tin, the one I hadn't touched since the summer. Inside, a few wraps, some balm, a tube of antibiotic ointment. I didn't know if it would help, but trying mattered. As I cleaned the bruise, the girl stayed near, watching, silent. She didn't cry, didn't flinch. Just observed, like she was recording it, so she'd know how to do it herself someday. My hands trembled slightly. Not from the cold. From the weight of it. How children learn care from watching the people who try, and how they carry it forward even when those people are gone. When I finished, I sat back again. The shepherd laid his head against the mattress. Girl leaned against his back. I watched the two of them survive something I couldn't yet name, but I was beginning to feel its shape. Not a disaster. A separation. A tearing away, and the aftermath of something once whole, now divided. I didn't ask her name, not yet. She hadn't offered it. And I'd learned in grief, in trauma, that names are sacred. They come when they're ready, and until then, silence holds them. The wind outside picked up, rattling the porch railing. The heater clicked off. The room fell quiet again, and in that silence, I realized something. They weren't just bonded, they were waiting, not for rescue, but in return. It was the third morning. The rain had returned. Not heavy, just steady. The kind that soaks into the porch wood and beads along the window glass like tiny footprints trying to come home. I had risen before them again. Habit, I guess. Grief trains you into early hours, into moving while the world still sleeps. And now I moved because I needed to, not for me, but for them. They were still wrapped together on the mattress. The child curled along the shepherd's flank, her breath soft and even. His eyes were closed, but not in full sleep, just the heavy-lidded kind of rest dogs enter when they don't want to miss anything. I sat on the floor beside the cold kitchen wall, knees drawn up, watching the rain gather in long sliding lines. On the window pane. There was no clock in the house anymore. I'd taken it down months ago, during a stretch of days where every tick felt like a countdown to something I wasn't ready to name. Time passed differently here. It wasn't measured. It felt. The girl stirred first. Not all at once, not startled. Just a quiet shift of weight, a hand twitching under the blanket, then slowly reaching upward to rest on the shepherd's head. She didn't look at him. She didn't have to. He lifted his head and pressed it gently into her chest. A gesture so instinctive, so intimate, that I looked away. They belonged to each other. Not in the way people own things, but in the way lost things find each other and refuse to let go. She sat up, blinking slowly, rubbing at her eye with the back of her wrist. Still no words, but she looked at me. Now hold my gaze, and not a dot that was new, not much. Just a small tilt of the chin, a quiet acknowledgement, but it was a bridge, and I crossed it. I stood, walked over with a damp cloth, and the softest thing I could find was an old flannel shirt, folded and faded, the sleeves torn at the elbows. I held it out. She took it, slipped it over her shoulders like she'd done it before. Some part of me imagined she had worn shirts like this. Not mine, but someone's. Someone who wasn't here now. I didn't ask where they were. Not yet. The shepherd stretched a slow rise to his feet, his front legs trembling slightly under the weight. He limped to the doorway, stopped, and looked back at me. Then I looked at her. Then the door again. He wanted out, not to leave, just to see. To walk the perimeter. To mark where it was his. The girl watched him too, then turned to me and raised her hand. She didn't point, just held it out, palm up. As if giving me something invisible. I understood. Okay, I whispered. Let's go. I opened the door. The rain was cold but light. It patterned against the porch in rhythm. The shepherd stepped out first. Then me. Then her. She held my hand, not tightly. Not like a child afraid of being taken, but like someone allowing themselves to be led. She walked beside me, silent, bare feet moving confidently over wet wood. The shepherd moved ahead slowly, limping, but alert. His head was up, ears twitching. He circled the yard. Every few steps he paused and sniffed the air, marked a corner, paused again, like he was drawing lines on the earth, building a map of safety. When we stepped off the porch, he stopped and looked back. Waited. It was the first time I realized he didn't need commands. He was already listening, not to words, but to presence. We walked the length of the narrow fence, past the sagging gate, and around the collapsed bird bath. The girl's feet moved carefully, deliberately, stepping only where I stepped. The dog led. I followed. And she followed me. A quiet procession. No destination. Only motion. I didn't know what we were becoming, but I knew what we weren't anymore. Strangers. We walked until the rain grew harder, until the wind pushed at our backs and the cold found its way down my collar. Then, as if by silent agreement, we all turned back toward the house. The shepherd didn't need guiding. He was already at the door, waiting. The girl brushed past me, paused only to press her hand briefly to his back before stepping inside. The day passed in slow, muted beats. I found canned soup and warmed it over the stove. We ate without words. She sat on the floor with the shepherd, feeding him bits of bread from her hand like a priest giving communion. Later, I washed his bandages. She watched. When I was done, she reached forward and placed her hand on his ribs, the place I had cleaned and wrapped the day before. There was something ritual in it, something sacred. She didn't smile, but she didn't turn away either. When the power flickered that night just once, briefly, she didn't cry. She reached for my arm instead. That was the first time she touched me by choice, not out of necessity, not out of hunger or cold. But comfort. And I felt it. In the pit of my chest, where the ache had lived for months, something loosened. That night, we slept in the same room, the mattress now pushed against the wall, the girl in the middle. The shepherd curled around her, and I am on the floor again, wrapped in a blanket I hadn't used since last winter. In the dark, just before sleep, I heard it. Not words. Just breathe, soft and steady, the kind of sound you make when you're not afraid anymore. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since I found them, I imagined a tomorrow. Not a full one. Not with plans or clarity. Just the possibility of it. And that was enough. The fourth morning came quietly. No rain, no wind. Just the hush that comes after the weather when the world feels too tired to move. I stood at the sink with a chipped mug of instant coffee, staring out at the line where the woods met the road. Nothing moved. No cars, no footsteps. Just the soft sway of leafless trees, branches bare and wet, reaching up like arms trying to hold the sky. Behind me, the house breathed. The girl was awake. I could hear the shuffle of her feet across the cracked linoleum, The soft whisper of her fingers brushing along the peeling hallway wall. She didn't run. Didn't crash or giggle the way most toddlers might have. She walked like she was still in someone else's house, even though this one was hers now, in the way only forgotten places ever truly belong to the lost. The shepherd padded behind her, always one step away, close enough to intervene, never far enough to forget her shadow. He was her perimeter, her wall, her silent vow. He hadn't barked once since I found them. Not at a creak, not at the door, not even at the sound of branches tapping the glass like fingers looking for a way in. But he was always alert. When she wandered into the bathroom and closed the door behind her, he sat outside it. When she lay down on the mattress, he circled once, twice, and then curled his body against hers like a brace. And when I stepped outside just briefly, just to feel the air, he followed me to the threshold and stood in the frame, head low, eyes narrowed. Not as a threat, but as a guardian. He stood between us and every open door. It wasn't dominance. It wasn't fear. It was devotion. The kind you don't train. The kind that comes from something deeper. Something owed. We stayed that way for a few days, feeding them what little I had, making soft meals on the stove, washing towels in the sink and hanging them to dry across the heater. The girl never spoke, but her rhythm became clearer. She liked the corners of rooms. She moved clockwise around furniture, never counter. She had a ritual before bed, not one I created, but one she brought with her. Pull the blanket flat, tap 3 times on the mattress, turn once, lie down. She did it each night, precisely, like a ceremony no one had told her to perform. And always, always, her hand found the shepherd's ear. That was the last thing before sleep. A soft tug, then stillness. I watched these patterns without comment. Didn't try to name them or break them. Just let them unfold, and somewhere in that stillness, she began to let me in, small things. When I reached for the can opener, she handed it to me without asking. When the shepherd winced on a step, she looked to me, and I nodded in, and she understood. I would help him now. We were learning from each other. Not through speech, but through observation. Like wild animals circling a shared watering hole, uncertain whether trust was earned or merely tolerated. Then, on the 7th morning, something changed. A knock. Not loud. Not urgent. But real. 3 soft taps on the door. The shepherd didn't bark, but he rose, and he stood in front of her, between her and the door, his body still and ready. The girl froze. She was near the couch, stacking buttons she'd found in a drawer. She dropped one. It clicked once against the wood. Another knock. I stepped toward the door slowly, brushing my hand along the shepherd's back as I passed. "I've got it," I murmured. He didn't move. Just shifted his weight slightly, muscles flexed, alert. I opened the door a few inches. A man stood on the porch. Mid-60s maybe. Wore a postal jacket. Even though he wasn't holding anything, his eyes weren't hostile. "Just curious, I saw the car tracks," he said, nodding toward the gravel drive. "Didn't know anyone still came out here." I kept the door tight. "Just staying a few days," I said. He squinted. Not unkindly. "You renting it from Ms. Kershaw?" he asked. "She passed last summer." I didn't answer. He scratched his neck. "Place has been empty since." "Was just walking past. Not many folks bring dogs this way." I glanced at the shepherd. He hadn't moved. The girl hadn't either. Her eyes locked on the man's boots, fingers pressed against the couch edge. I nodded once, not planning on staying long. The man hesitated, then nodded too. "All right then." He stepped back. "If you need anything, there's a co-op about 6 miles down ridge." He paused. "Shelter's closer, but they don't take in folks with animals. Just a heads up." His eyes flicked toward the shepherd. "Fine-looking dog," he said. Then, after a moment, "You take care now." I closed the door softly behind him. No confrontation. Just awareness. The world was still watching. Even when it didn't seem like it, I turned. The girl was watching me now. She didn't blink. Just tilted her head, slightly, like a question she couldn't ask. "It's all right," I whispered. "We're all right." The shepherd stepped back toward her, rested his head against her hand, and the air settled again. But the knock had changed something. Not broken. It just reminded us that this stillness was temporary. Stillness, after all, is a privilege. And soon the questions would come. Not today. Not tomorrow. But eventually, someone would wonder about the child, the dog, the man living in a house no one rented. But for now we were still allowed to breathe. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I saw something I hadn't seen before. The girl stood by the window, the shepherd beside her. She pressed her hand to the glass, not to wave, not to reach, but just to mark it. And then she looked back at me. She raised her hand, palm open. And held it there. Like a question or an invitation. I walked toward her. I'd leaned against the wall behind them, knees drawn up, jacket pulled close, half aware of the cold creeping up my spine. I kept watching their breathing, one rhythm, then the other, like waves lapping against the same shore. And for the first time in a long time, my own chest matched their tempo. Not fast, not anxious, just steady. The sun crept over the edges of the buildings. It didn't warm the air, not really, but it made the wet pavement shine like spilled silver. I shifted, stretching my legs, careful not to make noise. The shepherd's ears flicked back, not startled, aware. Still guarding, still holding a post no one asked him to take. I studied him again, even in the light. His wounds looked worse. The matted fur on his side had dried into ridges, stiff with blood. A long, shallow cut stretched across his flank. Not deep enough to be fatal, but dirty, infected maybe. His back paw was swollen, a nail cracked, the pad dark with dried blood and concrete grit. But he didn't whimper, didn't show pain the way some dogs do. There was a steadiness to him that felt old, like he'd survived things long before last night. His eyes opened, slowly, meeting mine, brown with flecks of something amber near the center. Not wild, not begging. Just watching. There's a kind of knowing in the eyes of dogs like this. Dogs who've lost something they can't name. It's not panic. It's not needed. It's the quiet that comes after devastation. The part where you stop expecting rescue. I didn't speak. I just nodded. He didn't need words. He needed something slower, something human, something honest. And then the girl stirred. A soft sound, not a cry. More like a murmur, a breath turned fragile at the edges. She pressed her face deeper into the shepherd's side and made a motion with her hand like she was trying to find something in her sleep. Gesture too practiced to be random, like she'd done it before, like she'd always reached for him. Felt something twist in me. The way grief does when it's not your own but still settles into your chest like it belongs there, because whatever. This was whatever had happened before I found them. This wasn't new. They hadn't just met. They had come through something together, and they'd survived it the way only the broken do, clinging to each other with the kind of quiet desperation that doesn't need language. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. Dead. Of course it was. I'd left the charger in the kitchen drawer again. The drawer I hadn't opened in 3 weeks, because that drawer held a tiny sock, and a receipt from a baby store, and a crayon I couldn't throw away. I stared at the black screen. No messages, no calls. Not that I expected any. The world had gone on turning. I just stepped off of it. Until last night. Until this dog. This girl. This silence. I stood slowly, knees cracking in protest. "Okay," I whispered. "We have to move, not to them. To myself, because I couldn't stay on that sidewalk forever. Eventually, someone would come. A shopkeeper, a city truck, a patrol car, and they wouldn't understand. They wouldn't see what I saw. they'd see a stray, an injured child. A cause for paperwork. For questions, but not for grace. So I bent down slowly and placed my hand near the girl's shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open. No scream. No panic. Just two wide gray-blue eyes blinking through sleep, staring up at me like I was neither threat nor savior. I said nothing. She didn't need noise. She needed care. I unwrapped the towel, now damp with morning dew, and bundled her tighter. Her dress clung to her legs, still damp and stained with soot. Her lips were pale, but her breath was steady. She watched me. Not afraid. Not smiling. Just there. Present. The shepherd lifted his head. His muscles bunched like he might rise. But he didn't. I looked around. No movement on the street yet. No cars. I knelt beside him. "I'm taking her with me," I said. "I don't know where yet, but I'll keep her warm." He didn't growl. Didn't blink. Just let his head fall back down, eyes never leaving the bundle in my arms. Trust. Given without guarantee. It cut deeper than I expected, because I knew what it cost to trust someone with your whole world. I knew what it felt like to hand over something you couldn't survive losing again. And still, he did it, because he had to. Because whatever had happened, he was done running. But I wasn't leaving him behind. "No," I whispered. "You too." It took effort. He was heavy with all muscle and sorrow. But I coaxed him to his feet, slow and quiet, using the leash from my own jacket sleeve, tied into a loop. Slipping gently around the base of his collar, he limped. Each step a wince, but he followed, because she was in my arms. And he was bound to her. They were a pair, threaded by something older than language. And I was just the one lucky enough to witness it. As we moved down the street, one step at a time, I felt something else rise behind my ribs. Not fear. Not hope. Just breathe. For the first time in a long time, I remembered how to breathe, and that was enough for now. The city faded behind us with every step. Didn't know exactly where I was walking. Just away. Away from the blinking sign. Away from the empty storefronts. Away from the cold gray stretch of sidewalk where they'd collapsed like a forgotten offering. The shepherd limped at my side, his weight shifting heavily with every step. There was no leash now, only the loop of my jacket sleeve, wrapped gently around his neck like a promise. He didn't pull. Didn't stray. He didn't need restraint. He stayed because of her. I carried the girl close to my chest. She was wrapped in the old towel again, one hand still balled into a fist in her face, the other resting against my collarbone, light as breath. She hadn't spoken. Not once, but her eyes were open now. Soft and unreadable. She watched the world pass by without expression, just long, slow blinks, like a bird unsure if it should take flight. We moved down a service road, past shuttered gas stations and chain-link fences wrapped in rusted out-of-business signs. Not far, but far enough to not be found too quickly. Far enough that I could think, there's a place I go sometimes when I can't sleep. An old rental house I still have keys to. It's half a shell now cleared out, almost condemned. But the plumbing works, the walls are dry, and the heater hums just enough to trick you into thinking it's warm. I didn't bring people there. Not until now. I turned off the road. The shepherd hesitated a moment, his paw dragging slightly in. The gravel but followed. He watched the baby. Every few steps he looked up, checked her, as if to make sure I still carried her, that she was still breathing. There was no bark in him. No sound, just that constant unspoken vigilance. The house sat low against a thicket of trees, its gutters sagging, porch lights long since blown out. The mailbox leaned sideways, and the windows, though intact, were grayed with dust, but it was quiet and empty. And that made it sacred. I unlocked the side door with the spare key I kept tucked in my boot. There wasn't much inside. Just a mattress on the floor in the back room, a stained armchair I couldn't bring myself to throw out, and a heater in the corner that clicked like a metronome when it ran. The girl didn't cry when I carried her in. She blinked slowly, her body limp against mine, and let her fingers curl back into the towel like it still held some part of the dog's warmth. I laid her gently on the mattress, then turned back toward the shepherd. He stood just inside the door, his head low, his front paw raised slightly off the ground. He didn't cross the threshold. I knelt, holding out my hand. "You're okay," I whispered. "Come in." Still he hesitated, not out of fear, not even pain. It was something else, like he didn't trust himself to step into stillness, like houses meant something to him. Something final. But then, from behind me, the girl stirred, a soft exhale, a shift in weight. Her fingers reached out toward the empty space beside her. Instinct, more than intention. The shepherd stepped forward. His body brushed mine as he passed. Heavy, solid, but quieter than I expected. Like he'd done this before. He walked straight to her, lowered himself beside the mattress, and pressed his body against its edge. Her hand found his fur again. She didn't look. She didn't have to. It was automatic. Like breathing, I sat back on the floor, just watching them. The room was still. The heater hummed in the background, ticking gently. And for a moment, it was enough. Not safe, not solved, but enough. I didn't ask questions yet, because the answers weren't ready. Instead, I got up, moved to the bathroom, and filled a bowl with warm water from the tap. It sputtered at first with old pipes, but cleared quickly. I found the cleanest towel I had left, folded in the closet beside a roll of gauze and a bottle of peroxide I hadn't opened since last winter. I returned to the room, crouched beside the shepherd. His ears flicked as I dipped the towel. I showed him my hands, slow, open. "Let me help," I said. Though I knew he didn't understand the words, he understood the tone. He let me lift his paw. It was worse than I thought. The pad was split, debris lodged deep. Dried blood crusted between his toes. He flinched when I pressed the towel to it, but didn't pull away. Just stared at the girl. Watched her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the moment. Worked slowly, washing away the blood, picking out the bits of gravel, wrapping the paw with care. He didn't growl, didn't lick the wound, just accepted it. They found the dog collapsed in front of a toy store. His paws were cut from concrete, his ribs arched like prayer hands beneath soaked fur. And beside the flickering glass and forgotten shelves of dolls, he did not beg, he simply waited. Story will unravel you slowly, one breath, one scar, one quiet act of loyalty at a time. Because what binds a broken dog to a crying child is not coincidence. It's a memory. Like share and tell us where in the world you are watching from today. I remember the rain first. Not the thunder, not even the wind. Just the soft percussion of it as it met the sidewalk, falling so gently that it almost sounded like breath. It was late, or maybe it was early. That kind of hour where even the lights seemed too tired to shine. I hadn't meant to walk that far. But grief will do strange things to a body and make you drift. Make you follow streets you don't remember choosing. Make you pass stores you don't notice until something stops you cold. There beneath the crooked overhang of a shuttered toy shop lay the dog, German Shepherd. Large but folded in on himself, like something once proud, now collapsed in apology. He didn't flinch when I stepped closer. He didn't growl. He simply looked at me just once, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't let myself feel in months. The dull ache of recognition. His fur was slick with rain and something darker. Blood? Maybe? Ash? Possibly. There was a smell to him that didn't belong to the city. It smelled like smoke and damp plaster. Like he had run through something that should have killed him but didn't. One paw was bent oddly beneath him. His side rose and fell in sharp, ragged pulls. And under his body, tucked against the curve of his belly, was something small. At first, I thought it was a blanket. But then it moved, a hand, tiny, clutching his fur like it was the only thing left in the world. The child was no more than 2, shoeless, silent, soaked through. Tears didn't fall from her eyes. Not yet. They simply welled, clinging to her lashes. Like they were afraid to let go. I stood there for a long time. Long enough for the streetlights to hum and flicker. Long enough for the dog's breathing to grow quieter. Long enough to realize neither of them had any intention of moving. And still, not a single sound. Only the rain, the neon flicker of a broken sign, and the soft, shivering breath of a child pressing her cheek into the shoulder of a dying dog. I should have called someone. But there's a kind of silence that binds you not out of fear, but reverence. That's what this was. A sacred stillness. As if moving too fast or speaking too loud might break whatever thread was keeping them both alive. So I did the only thing I could. I sat on the wet concrete and waited. Not for help, but for understanding, because somehow, in the curve of that shepherd's body around the child, in the way she nestled into his side like she'd been there before I knew this, wasn't the beginning. It was the middle of something much older. The rain didn't let up. Not that night. I stayed. I didn't have a reason to, not a logical one. But grief doesn't ask for logic, it only asks for witnesses. And there, in that narrow stretch of concrete outside a forgotten toy store, I became one. The dog slept or maybe drifted. His breathing would catch now and then, shallow enough that I'd sit forward, watching his ribs to make sure they still moved. The child never stirred. She lay curled into the crook of his side, the way a memory curls into the space between dreams and waking. Her fingers twitched in sleep, still wrapped tight in the wiry clumps of his coat. Not even the cold could loosen her grip. The rain pooled along the curb. It caught the flickering blue and yellow glow from the broken store sign, stretching reflections across the asphalt like paint left out in the weather. Behind the glass, dust-laced dolls stared blankly from tilted shelves, and a wooden train sat halfway off its track, as if something or someone had left in the middle of playtime and never returned. It was a strange place to collapse. But then again, I wasn't sure he'd chosen it. I shifted, careful not to startle them. The wet was in my bones now, creeping up from the pavement, pulling at the tired places that had already forgotten how to warm. But I stayed, not out of heroism, but because something about that moment felt ancient. Like I'd seen it once before. In a dream, maybe, or a memory too painful to hold straight. The wind picked up briefly, pulling a newspaper across the street like a wounded bird. And in that sudden gust, the scent came stronger. Smoke and wet plaster. Something burned and half-extinguished. His fur held it, thick in the undercoat. Not just saturated. I knew that smell. Years ago, before I ever let grief name me, I'd helped gut houses after a firestorm rolled through the next county. That scent of wet ash, scorched wood, and the metallic sting of soaked insulation stayed with you. It clung to your lungs for days. The shepherd had run through a fire. That much was certain. But the rest, that was still only silence. I edged closer. Inch by inch, his ear twitched, but he didn't lift his head. Just the softest flick of muscle, a warning without aggression. I whispered, "It's okay." Not for him. For me, I didn't expect a response. But after a long moment, his tail cracked with mud and caked blood, gave one slow thump against the sidewalk, then another. Like a heartbeat returning. Like permission, I took a slow breath and reached forward, palm up, letting the back of my hand hover just above the child's shoulder. She was warm, but faintly so. The soaked fabric of her dress clung to her skin, and her legs were scratched shallow scrapes, more from running than falling. Her face was hidden, tucked beneath the dog's jaw. But she wasn't afraid. There was no tremble in her, no recoil. When I touched the damp cloth, that's what stayed with me. This child alone, shoeless, wordless, hadn't just found a dog. She had buried herself inside him, and he'd let her no more than that. He'd shaped himself around her, protective even in pain, willing to fall for her, willing to die beside her. I swallowed against the weight in my throat. I'd known loyalty before. I'd seen it in wartime, in shelters, in the final moments when animals pressed their heads into the hands of those they trusted. But this was deeper. Like the dog had been waiting for her long before she came. I brushed the wet hair from her brow, and beneath the grime and soot, there it was, the faint shape of something familiar. A small plastic clip, butterfly-shaped, pink, still lodged in her tangled curls. It was absurd, almost, that something so delicate had survived what they'd clearly fled. But that's the thing about children. They carry symbols better than we do. Even when the house burns, even when the world folds in on itself, they hold on to what matters. And in that moment, with her breath rising soft and even against the chest of a half-broken shepherd, I knew she wasn't lost. She was choosing him, and he had already chosen her. I looked at the collar, still wrapped around his neck, though the buckle had snapped, melted slightly. There was no tag, just a burned edge of nylon and a few singed threads where a nameplate once was. I could guess what had happened. But guesses aren't truths. Not yet. Truth needs time. Truth needs quiet. And both were in abundance that night. A siren whispered far off, somewhere across the river, not near enough to matter. Just another reminder of a city too large to care about corners like this. But this corner mattered now. Because somewhere, between the rain and silence, a bond had formed. Or maybe reformed. The baby stirred. Not much, just a soft gasp, like the kind that follows tears too tired to fall. Her hand shifted, curling deeper into the shepherd's matted fur. He grunted. Low, guttural, but not in pain. It was more like a promise not to move. Not without her. I looked up. A security camera blinks red above the store. No one had come. No one would. So I did something I hadn't done in months. I reached into my coat, pulled out the old towel I kept for my own reasons, a habit from the days when I still drove places, still cared enough to prepare. I spread it slowly beside them, gently lifted the girl. She didn't wake. I half expected the shepherd to lunge, to protest. But he didn't. He lifted his head just barely and rested his muzzle in the space where her body had been, eyes following her until I laid the towel beside him, wrapped her again, and pressed her gently back into his side. Then he exhaled, a deep, long sigh, like he'd been holding something in. Like now, with her wrapped warm again, he could finally rest. I didn't know their names. I didn't know their story, but I knew I would stay, because something was still unfolding here. Something not finished. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was part of it. By the time the first light broke, the rain had stopped. Not cleared, just paused. The kind of hush that makes the sky feel like it's waiting for something to fall again. The city was still. Quiet. Not sleeping. Just pausing. There's loneliness in the early morning. It's not the same as night. Night feels deliberate, like something people step into. But dawn is unchosen. It shows you the bones of things. And in that soft light, everything looked more bare. The sidewalk was slick. Pale water gathered in the cracks, carrying flecks of ash and dirt toward the gutter. The toy store window, once bright with neon and false color, now looked grayer, dust-covered, faded. The shepherd hadn't moved. The girl either. They lay pressed together, two silhouettes in stillness, as if the world had drawn a chalk outline around them and whispered, "Stay here. Don't vanish yet." I hadn't slept. Not truly.